tuning in. Today I'm going to be demonstrating an active reading strategy that students can work with from home, whether they're being homeschooled or they are virtual learning through their own schools. The annotation guide is a strategy that will help them improve their reading abilities, understand text better, and ultimately give them more information to use in their writings. From my time as a teacher, this was my favorite strategy for teaching reading. A little bit of background on me: I taught high school for almost 3 years. I taught 10th through 12th grade students, and across the board, reading and writing were the top things that they struggled with. Um, and I truly believe that if a student can improve their reading ability, they can improve their writing ability, because most of the writings that students are asked to do in school require them to have read something first, to understand it, to formulate an opinion about it, and to pull evidence from that text. So students really can't do that if they don't understand the text first. So I'm going to try to keep this video as simple, clear, and hopefully as short as possible. I just want to go over how to do this strategy from home, and this is something that a student who's doing virtual learning can use, a parent can use, and then teach their child how to do it with homeschooling. And if your child is attending school during this time, it's very possible that they've already heard about this strategy. It's heavily used in elementary and middle school classes where students are exposed to those fundamentals of reading and writing for the first time. So your child may already be familiar with this. But the hope is that you can come away from this video as parents and be familiar with it for yourself. And hopefully this is something that can become a routine in your child's learning. This strategy can be used with any age and with any text. You can Google annotation guide and you'll come up with a bunch of different ones. They all kind of have the common elements that you see here: star, underline, circle, question mark, check mark, C, and EV for evidence. They all kind of have the same basic principles, but there will be slight differences in between each ones, and especially depending on age group. If you are working with younger children, then you might find a different version that's a little less complex, but this is a rather basic version that anyone can apply to their reading. So just to go over it really quickly, you can do this if you have a printed out text in front of you. You can do this with a pen or pencil, but I'm going to be demonstrating it using Word software on the computer to show that it can be used either way. Star, this is where we take note of the main idea or ideas connected to the overall theme. So as your child is reading, they need to have that big question in their head: what is this about? And whenever you're talking about a nonfiction text like an article or a speech, then you're looking for main idea. What is the speaker trying to get across to the audience? But if you're dealing with a work of fiction or a poem, you're looking for theme. And I like to describe theme as what is the lesson learned. So we're looking for theme, and today we're going to be looking at The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, which is a short story, fiction, so we'll be looking for theme. Underline, we're looking for keywords, details, significant quotes that support the main idea or theme. Now, these are just examples of what you could be looking for. And I'm imagining that if you are watching this, there might be some people out there asking, well, how do I know if it's a keyword? What details should I be looking for? And those are good questions, but I want to kind of say that you don't have to have it all figured out. Use your underline ability to underline anything that you think is important or that your child thinks is important. So, for example, I might say, okay, I have been ill, very ill. I'm going to actually go ahead and underline this, even though I haven't really started my reading process yet. I'm going to underline this. I have been ill, very ill. The reason that I'm doing that is because it gives us insight into the narrator's either physical or mental or both. Physical health, has he been sick? Mental health, is he, mentally ill? So I'm going to underline that. Now, I'm underlining it. I don't have it all figured out. And just how I posed those questions, is he physically ill? Is he mentally ill? We have question mark, and that's kind of skipping over circle. But we have question mark. Write questions you have in the margins. Note that the questions are different from unknown details, which we are going to get to in a second. Questions are thoughts that you have. And so what I'm going to do here, doing this virtually, I've underlined it, and then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click comment, new comment. And then I'm coming right here and I'm going to say, you can say narrator, speaker. I'm going to say narrator. Is the narrator mentally or physically ill? Question mark. So I have a question here, and for the sake of it, just so we're keeping our annotation guide, I can put that question mark there to remind myself, hey, this is a question, not necessarily a prediction or a connection, which we're going to get to as we go down the list. So kind of coming back here to circle, we're going to circle unknown words or confusing details and sentences. To give you an example of this, I do prefer to do this on paper. So if you have the ability to print off a short story or something like that, it's much easier to circle things on paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just actually make an exception here. And I'm going to say, for digital, use blue ink. So let's say that I heard sounds from heaven, okay? And I heard sounds from hell. So let's say that I was confused by this. I'm going to then go up here and I'm going to change. You can use highlight or ink. I'm just going to do the highlight if this will show up. And I'm doing it in blue. The whole point with this annotation guide is to give readers a way of identifying these different thoughts, these different questions, predictions, different evidence that they're finding. It's just a way to identify that. But what's really cool about it is a reader may not think about, you know what, hey, let me take note of what I don't understand, or let me pose a question, let me make a prediction, let me take note of this quote that I think is really important. A reader, especially in a classroom environment where a lot of times kids don't feel comfortable reading in front of other kids, they kind of want to brush over what they don't know, and they want to spend as little time under the spotlight as possible if they struggle with their reading, because they don't want anyone to see them struggle, and that's totally understandable. But when you are doing this annotation guide, it teaches your child how to take note of these things. It gives them a way of taking note of these things until, if they do it enough, this becomes second nature. This is how people develop active reading. Just to continue down, we have check mark. I couldn't find the symbol for a check mark, and again, this is going to be difficult to do on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, for digital, use pink ink. Okay. So whenever I come across something, whenever I have an opinion, a reflection, an analysis, a prediction, a summary, I am going to use pink ink. If I want to, actually, I don't even have to do that, because let's say I have an opinion about, okay, let's say I have an opinion about this. Is it not clear that I am not mad? If I'm doing this digitally, I can click the comment, I can click new comment, and then let's say I have a question. I can do Q, I can do question mark. Yeah, I would do a question mark. No, what am I doing? Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, no, that was a question. Opinion. So let's just say, opinion. Is it not clear that I am not mad? My opinion might be, if you have to ask if you are mad, then perhaps you are. So in showing you how to do this with a digital, like with a computer, you don't necessarily have to do question mark. You don't necessarily have to change the ink color unless you're pinpointing something specifically. But an opinion, a reflection, analysis, prediction, or summary, this is something you're coming up with. So you can highlight the piece that you have this opinion or analysis of, click new comment, and then come right here. And I personally think, whether you're typing out opinion or if you're just putting an O, you should say which one it is, because again, when your child is doing this, let's say they have a lot of opinions, but they don't have any analysis. That can show you that maybe they aren't comfortable with analysis yet. And analysis is a more advanced level of reading. Before you can analyze something, you have to first understand something. So if your child isn't comfortable with analysis, but let's say they are summary is pretty basic, then you may encourage your child to actually read the text again and do a whole new set of annotations. And there is actually a reading strategy that involves multiple reads. 3 is typical. You go in, you have a cold read. This is just to get an idea of what it's about. You go in with a second read, and you may look for half of these things. And then in your final read, you go in and look for the other half. Or in your final read, you might do the more advanced stuff, which would be your analysis, or looking for evidence relevant to the main idea. Because before you can find evidence, you first have to know the main idea or theme, and it may take you reading the entire thing once through to understand this. So I think having your child denote, is it an opinion, a reflection, analysis, prediction, summary, having them denote what their thought is, I think is a good idea for you to kind of keep track of where do they feel comfortable. And moving on to C. C is a more advanced level of active reading. This is where we make a connection with the text, and connections may be text to text, and this is going to be most easily done in the English classroom where students are reading multiple texts. Not necessarily multiple texts at a time, but their teacher may be covering a unit on Edgar Allan Poe, and they may read The Telltale Heart and The Cask of I always say that wrong, but they may be reading two different texts by the same author and comparing the author's style or comparing theme, different things like that. And that would be text to text. And the text doesn't have to be from the same author. It could be any text. And what's really cool about text to text is that, let's say your child sees something on social media. They might come across an article on mental health, and then they read The Telltale Heart, and they draw a connection between a fiction text and a nonfiction text. And that is also considered text to world, because that article would have been written in current time. We're just assuming written in current time, and it would reflect the world of today, whereas The Telltale Heart reflects Edgar Allan Poe's world all those years ago. So this is really cool, and I always encourage students to make as many connections as they can to the world that we live in today, especially when we're reading texts that have been written hundreds of years ago. Now, text to self is probably the easiest connection to make, because no one really knows us better than ourselves. We don't have to have read anything else to make that connection, and we don't even necessarily have to be up to date on the social norms of the world. We just have to know ourselves. So if your child is struggling with the idea of making connections, why don't you encourage them to make connections text to self? So as we go through, and we are going to read parts of this short story to further demonstrate the strategy, as we go through The Telltale Heart, we may take note of how the narrator is feeling, and we may say, I felt that way. And then your child would not just want to say, I have felt the same way as the narrator. They would then want to go ahead and explain how or why. Because whenever they explain how they have felt and how they feel it's related to the narrator, they then have a greater understanding of the narrator. And I think that's what's great about connections, is it enables the student to have a greater understanding of the text and the narrator. Finally, we have evidence. Evidence is given by the author to support claims or ideas, and it's important to keep track of evidence because it will serve as textual evidence in your writings related to your text. Now, like I mentioned before, students won't necessarily know what evidence supports the author's claims until they know what the author's claims are. And when I say author's claims, that's more relevant to a nonfiction text like a speech or an article. But when we think of ideas or theme, it's the same thing. So your child's not going to necessarily know what counts as evidence until they figured out what the theme is. But what they can do during a first read would be, again, to underline the keywords, details, or significant quotes. So really just anything that they think is important, they should underline. Because if they think it's important, It's standing out to them for some reason. And we all have a sort of instinct in us that once they're done reading, they'll probably go back and see that a lot of these important details that they've underlined are, in fact, evidence that supports the theme. So, with all of this said, we learn how to look for main idea or theme. We learn how to take note of important details. We learn how to take note of things that confuse us or words that we don't know. And this is important because, especially in a small group setting, this may be more suitable for in class setting. But if one student doesn't understand something or is confused by something and they're willing to share that with the group, they can then get the opinions or interpretations of the other group members and deepen their understanding. And if it's an unknown word, then they can know, hey, in my second read, I'm going to go back and I'm going to use context clues to figure this word out, or I'm going to use a dictionary, I'm going to Google it on my phone. But it's important not to just skip over the things we don't know. We can kind of skip over them in the first read, but we still want to underline them and say, you know what, this is a little confusing to me. This strategy teaches us to question. To me, questions are the ultimate level of active reading. Whenever I'm reading something, I go through and I have questions about almost everything. And what I find is when I make a question, say I come up with a question here, like, okay, is the narrator mentally or physically ill? If I continue to read this text, I'm probably going to figure it out. And if I don't figure it out, then that could be a topic for an essay where the student would compile evidence that perhaps supports both of these possibilities and brings that to light. I think it's important to question things in literature, but it's also important to realize that not all questions will be answered, and not all answers to the question are going to be the same. And that's the coolest thing about literature, is that many people may have different interpretations of the same text. Check mark, looking for understandings, opinion, reflection, analysis, prediction, summary. This, again, is just the epitome of active reading. We all do it. We'll sit here and we'll read something, and then it's almost like when we're driving and it's like we come to and we realize we've been zoned out. And the same thing happens when we're reading. Even if we're just excellent readers, this, that, and the other, we still have those moments of zoning out where our mind goes other places. And looking to make an opinion, looking to reflect, looking to analyze something, looking to make a prediction, even just summarizing it. Like if your child knows, hey, I need to write a summary at the end of each page, or I'm going to have to write a summary at the end of reading this after my first read. It has your brain tuned in doing something, not just sitting there and reading it for the sake of reading it. Connections we've talked about, and evidence we've talked about. I really feel that evidence is best found on a second read. Evidence is best found after the student already has an understanding of what the text is about, and evidence is really best found when the student already has an idea of what their opinion is, what they want to write about. You know, typically teachers don't just assign reading for the sake of reading. There's usually a writing assignment to accompany that. Even if it's just one question, there's going to be some sort of reflection, there's going to be some sort of discussion, some sort of essay a constructed response. There's going to be something. And evidence, to me, is best found when the student already knows what it's about and they already know what their opinion is of it. Because then they can go in and find the evidence to support their analysis. So now that we've kind of explained all of this, I'm going to read a little bit of this. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read a little bit of this, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to do some annotations to demonstrate how to do it. And this story, The Telltale Heart, is in the public domain, which is why I chose this one. I'm going to be including a link to a place where you can download a lot of texts that are within public domain. That way they're free to print off. They're free to do things like this on the internet. So without further ado, let's get started. It's true, yes. I have been ill, very ill. But why do you say that I have lost control of my mind? Why do you say that I am mad? Now, this new comment, who is the narrator speaking to? Can you not see that I have full control of my mind? Full control of my mind. So, how am I going to... I'm going to say understanding in response to question about mentally or physically ill. This tells me the narrator has been accused of being mentally ill. However, no. Who has he been accused by? Question mark. Is it not clear that I am not mad? Indeed, the illness only made my mind, my feelings, my senses stronger, more powerful. The illness. What illness? Indeed, the illness only made my mind, my feelings, my senses stronger, more powerful. My senses of hearing especially became more powerful. I could hear sounds I have never heard before. I heard sounds from heaven and I heard sounds from hell. Listen, listen, and I will tell you how it happened. You will see, you will hear how healthy my mind is. It is impossible to say how the first idea entered my head. There was no reason for what I did. What did he do? I did not hate the old man. I even loved him. He had never hurt me. I did not want his money. I think it was his eye. His eye was like the eye of a vulture, the eye of one of those terrible birds that watch and wait while an animal dies, and then fall upon the dead body and pull it to pieces. Two thoughts here. Simile. A lot of times teachers will ask their students to look out for things like alliteration, simile, metaphor. All of this is figurative language. His eye was like the eye of a vulture is a simile. The other thing, the eye of one of those terrible birds that watch and wait while an animal dies and then fall upon the dead body and pull it to pieces to eat it. Did the narrator feel the old man was watching him slash stalking him, did the narrator feel unsafe around the old man? Why? So these are some questions that I have. It says his eye was like the eye of a vulture, and we all know, I mean, he goes on to express the eye of one of those terrible birds that watch and wait while an animal dies. You could even add, is the narrator dying? Watch and wait while an animal dies, and then fall upon the dead body and pull it to pieces. It's just very interesting for the narrator to make this essentially connection between the old man's eye and the vulture. And one could say that perhaps the eye just looks like the vulture. And it says his eye, the eye of one of those birds. So that could be it. But the thing about literature is that authors typically mean more than what they say. And for him to associate this old man with a vulture watching and waiting while an animal dies and then tearing the dead body to pieces, this tells us about the old man, but perhaps more than anything, it tells us about the narrator. You might add, is the narrator delusional or paranoid to think this of an old man? When the old man looked at me with his vulture eye, a cold feeling went up and down my back. Even my blood became cold. And so I finally decided I had to kill the old man and close that eye forever. This is an interesting sentence to me. And so I finally decided I had to kill the old man and close that eye forever. The narrator speaks about murder very matter of fact. Close that eye forever. What does it say about the narrator that not the old man, but his eye, the thing that sees the narrator, is the thing that had to be shut forever? It's almost like the narrator doesn't want to be seen. Perhaps the narrator doesn't like himself. Perhaps the narrator has a secret that he is afraid the vulture eye will detect. So that's a bunch of questions. Now, just kind of taking a look at what I've done so far. When I'm doing this digitally, it's easier for me to put everything right here, but taking a look back at my annotation guide, I'll start here. There was no reason for what I did. That's a question. His eye was like the eye of a vulture. I'm going to actually even though I've already kind of pinpointed it, I'm going to underline that as well, because I think that that's important. And I also feel that this is important because this shows the mental state. And you could even say here, this is where the strategy gets repetitive, because anything that you have a question about or a comment on is important. But for the sake of staying with the strategy, we'll kind of go there. So you think that I am mad. So again here, I could pose the question, who is the narrator speaking to? But I've already posed that question, so I don't need to do that again. A madman cannot plan, but you should have seen me. During all of that week, I was as friendly to the old man as I could be, warm and loving. So this to me is important. I'm going to underline this, and I'm going to create a new comment here, which is going to be an understanding. So I'm going to just put this in a U. But you should have seen me. The narrator seems proud of his crime against the old man. During all of that week, I was as friendly to the old man as I could be, and warm and loving. The fact that the narrator says he was friendly, warm, and loving to the old man during the week leading to his death shows that the narrator is unreliable. And what do we mean when we say an unreliable narrator? This is something important to know. A lot of times when we read something, we take it as truth. But it's important to remember whether you're reading something from first person, well, no, I guess it would be mostly with first person. Even though the main character is telling you these things, or even telling another character in the story these things, it's only one person's side of the story. It's only one person's account of events. And so when I say an unreliable narrator, we see that the narrator has made up his mind to kill this old man. Yet he's friendly to him. He's warm and loving to him. So this shows that he's two-faced, for lack of a better word. Split personality almost. So again, these are words that I'm using to describe the narrator. So I'm going to add that to my note. Now you can see here where I did friendly, warm, and loving, and I put that in quotes. That's because that's pulled directly from the text. And if I had a page number here, I would put the page number so that when I go, like say I had a writing assignment after this, this is technically evidence. So when I say, and that the page number would be used in my citation, but that's a completely different video. But like, let's say I'm writing something and I say the narrator appears to be two-faced or have a split personality, or the narrator is unreliable. This would be my evidence along with this. And so I finally decided I had to kill the old man and close that eye forever. During all of that week, I was friendly, warm, loving. This supports the claim of the narrator being unreliable, of the narrator being two-faced or having a split personality. So anytime you see quote marks, you know that that is evidence. Every night about 12 o'clock, I slowly opened his door, and when the door was opened wide enough, I put my hand in and then my head. In my hand, I held a light covered over with a cloth so that no light showed, and I stood there quietly. Then carefully I lifted the cloth just a little so that a single thin small light fell across that eye. So what I'm going to do here, put a comment here. The narrator is clearly obsessed with that eye. He doesn't speak. I hate when I make typos. He doesn't speak of the old man, only his eye. This obsessive nature supports the claim that he is unreliable and also supports the assertion that he is mentally unstable. Also, we can go here. Every night at about 12 o'clock, I slowly opened his door. So, new comment here. Question: does the narrator live in the same house as the old man? How else would the narrator have such easy access to the old man? And then we can also say an understanding. This also lets us know that the narrator is stalking the old man. This further supports the notion of him being unstable and unreliable, and it makes us question the narrator even more, because the narrator all but states that the old man is stalking him like a vulture. But in fact, the narrator is the one stalking the old man. So, looking at what we have so far, does the narrator live in the same house as the old man? This gives us an idea of the setting. And what I would also say is, okay, does the narrator live in the same house as the old man? How else would the narrator have such easy access to the old man? I'm going to add here, if so, is it a nursing home or a mental hospital? Question mark. We don't know anything about the speaker. We don't know what the speaker looks like. I'm not even sure if we technically know the gender of the speaker. But we know that the speaker is talking about an old man. And we know that the speaker has easy access to this old man. So we can assume that, and this might be a prediction, we might say, is it a nursing home or a mental hospital? we might add a P here. We might predict that it's one of these two things, because by saying, by calling the man old man, it kind of makes us think there's no connection, there's no familiar connection between the two of them. Old man. He doesn't refer to him by his name. He doesn't refer to him as perhaps grandpa or any sort of family relation. So we might think a nursing home, but we also then have to think, if this is a nursing home, then the speaker is old, and if you're old, then you're probably not calling other people old. So we might put here, this is technically an analysis, because the narrator refers to the speaker as old man, and again, this is evidence, it makes me believe the speaker is younger than the old man, because someone who is the same age as you wouldn't refer to you as old. With this in mind, it is more likely that the old man and the narrator are in a mental hospital together. So this would be an analysis / prediction. And then we go on to say, how else would the narrator have such easy access to the old man? The other thought that I have would be, let's see, we can call this a prediction. If the narrator does not live in the same house as the old man, then they must be neighbors. So what's really important here is that when your child has a thought, they need to have time to fully write that thought down and think it out, because I mean, I've read this a million times, but it's been years, and I don't know that I've ever done this strategy with it. And as I'm sitting here thinking, nursing home or mental hospital, it just occurred to me in the moment as thinking about it and talking about it, that the narrator refers to the speaker as old man. And this lets me know that the speaker probably is going to be younger than the quote old man. And so that makes me think that they're probably not in a nursing home. And while these are not the only two possibilities, these were the two that I came up with. And in a classroom environment, other students might have come up with other ideas, but I came up with a mental hospital, and I came up with that based on this talk of being mentally ill and this talk of being mad and the unreliable nature of the narrator. So if I were to write, a paragraph about this, I would pull different pieces of evidence to support this. But I draw the conclusion with this in mind, it's more likely that the old man and the narrator are in a mental hospital together. This is an analysis based on the facts as well as a prediction, because it's based on a question. We don't know for a fact that this is true, but this is what we're predicting. This is what we're thinking. And this is really important because some of these questions may not ever be answered, but it's important for us to have these predictions. And it's important for your child to be able to look at the facts and come up with a question, which then leads them basically on a treasure hunt where they kind of put the pieces together from question to prediction to analysis. And that's all down here in the understandings. We check out what's important, we formulate a question, and then we understand it better. So now, based off of this, I could write an entire paragraph based on just this amount of the text about the fact that we're probably dealing with an unreliable narrator, and I've got plenty of evidence to back it up. So, for the struggling reader, the strategy helps them to better understand things. And for the struggling writer, doing all of this, figuring out what's important. And again, this is what's important to you, because what's important to them as a reader, as a student, is going to be different from the next person, but it's all important. So what is important to them? Let's underline it. And then what question do I have about this? And then whenever I really sit down and think about those questions, what predictions do I have and what analysis do I come up with? And then once I come up with my analysis, I refer back to the text here and I say, this is why I think this. Even with predictions, this is why I think this. And I will say, all good writing is based on evidence. All good writing is based on evidence. Now, of course, creative writing is different, but when you're dealing with schoolwork, you need evidence to support everything. And so as I'm writing in here, I say old man is in quote marks. I say, all of these little areas where I've kind of put quote marks around different things, all of that supports it. It says, this further supports the notion of him being unstable and unreliable. And so when I'm saying this, I'm referring to all of this. So I hope that this kind of goes over the strategy. I know this isn't a perfect video. There's some hiccups here, and doing it with digital versus actually having this printed out and being able to go through this with a pen and pencil is different. But the word comment feature is great because this copy is saved, and you have the option to save it on your computer as well, where there's actually going to be a blank version of this, and you could download that, save it, and then go through and comment. And you can actually email this to a teacher. You could grant access to the document, see share. You could share it with students in a class and have multiple people comment. A lot of schools use Google Classroom, and the sharing and commenting features are very similar in that as well. Google Docs, very, very similar. But the whole idea here is that the student is able to keep track of their thoughts. What did he do? It directly relates it to the text. And so let's say we went through this entire thing and we ended up having a whole list of these, which we would. Then once the student is done doing that, they can pick out, okay, what is the biggest things that I want to write about? Let's say they had to write an essay. Let's say, we have a paragraph here about the narrator. And then let's say they had a paragraph about theme. They had a paragraph about setting, or maybe they had a paragraph about relating the text to modern day. based on all of these notes here, these annotations that they have on the side, they could go back and almost have those paragraphs written, or at least have the basis for that. They wouldn't just be left with a story that they really don't understand and a writing assignment that they can't even begin to do. So, my key takeaways from this is use the strategy. Encourage your children to read their text multiple times. Encourage your students to, or your children, to take note of what they think is important, to underline it however they wish, or highlight it, bold it, whatever. You can alternate this annotation guide to suit their preferences, but they need to take note of what they think is important. And once they do that, as we did, the more they do that, the more questions they're going to come up with. And once they come up with questions, they can engage with those questions, come up with predictions, analysis. Ultimately, they're building an understanding of the text. And as they do this, this is the one where we came up. This was our primary understanding. We start with a question, we then have a prediction analysis, and ultimately we come up with an understanding, and it's based on evidence. Do I have every piece of evidence in this paragraph? No. But based on these other things that we've seen as important, that we've commented on, things we mention here, we can then plug in that evidence and have a well-rounded thought, a well-rounded understanding. So yeah, I really hope that this video is positive and that it helps. Please let me know if you enjoyed this. Reach out to me on Facebook or leave a comment. However you wish. Let me know if you'd like to see more videos like this, or if you have any tips for me for making the video a little more seamless. I hope that this helps, and I wish you all the best school year, and happy reading and happy writing.